Alright, everybody, peace. Welcome to the STBY basketball show. Wherever have you're listening, we're so grateful to have you here with us. As you guys know, I'm your host, Casuan, and we've got a wonderful show for you today, guys. We're going to be recapping some of the top matchups in women's college basketball. We are also going to be discussing the state of affairs of the Los Angeles Clippers and reviewing the trade they made since acquiring James Harden, how they looked as of late within their past couple of games. And we're going to pose the question of who is the best player in the NBA right now? And our answer for that might surprise you. But to start the show, I want to talk about the state of affairs that is actually women's college basketball. And I want to tackle that question by framing and analyzing one of two of the biggest matchups from this past week. One of those being Maryland and South Carolina. But before we get into it, guys, if you haven't already, be sure to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button as well, so you guys can stay up to date on all of our latest content. And be sure to follow us on Patreon as well. You can do so by going to patreon.com, clicking on the search bar, and typing in "Sorry to Bother You" show. That way you can gain access to all of our exclusive content that we post daily. And if you'd like to support our network and our company, you can do so by following the link in the ticker below. It's streamelements.com/sorrytobotheryoushow/tip. Once again, it's streamelements.com/sorrytobotheryoushow/tip. That link will also be in the description of the video. And none of this is possible without you guys as fans. So we're so grateful and honored for all the love and support that you show us, because it's a pleasure and it's a blessing to have this platform to talk about sports from an unbiased perspective. So with that being said, guys, let's go ahead and get right into it. So as I was saying, over the weekend, number 6 South Carolina played number 10 ranked Maryland in a home matchup. And the reason I want to talk about this game, because I think it represents the state that women's college basketball is currently in. And if you've heard me talk about this before, you've heard me say that this is the most talent that's ever been in women's college basketball at any point in time since its inception. And I believe that South Carolina is a prime example of that. If we remember last year, South Carolina had an extremely dominant team led by Aaliyah Boston and Bree Beal and Zaya Cook and Victoria Saxton and Letitia Mehier, all of which were drafted into the WNBA. Many thought that this would be a rebuilding year for South Carolina. However, Dawn Staley coined the phrase a renovation, not a rebuild. And we see that South Carolina is now led by Camila Cardozo, who could very well be a top 3 pick this year in the WNBA draft, or next year, sorry. Sophomore Chloe Kitts, who came in early last year as a freshman. Bree Hall, Raven Johnson, and transfer Tahina Paopao, with Ashley Watkins coming off the bench. Sanaya Fagan coming off the bench as well. And the freshman, Folt Wiley, Malaysia Folt Wiley, who has started to gain national attention based off her play against Notre Dame to start out the season. But I don't want to get too far off. This is the most talent that has been inside women's college basketball since its inception, and South Carolina is a prime example of that. However, we are still not seeing a large turnout. Yes, we're seeing a turnout if we're comparing the numbers within women's college basketball. However, we're still not seeing an increase compared to other sports in America. And the question then becomes, okay, what is it going to take for women's college basketball to start to gain and heighten and even more heightened level of notoriety, so where it can start to be compared to even men's college basketball? And the question then comes down to investments. And I will say this: women's college basketball is beginning to increase in notoriety and acclaim, and I will argue even more so than the WNBA. And people are more inclined to watch college sports than professional sports because there's a heightened level of loyalty. There's more of an emotional factor with these collegiate teams, whether it's football or basketball. And so that's why you're naturally going to get more turnout for these collegiate sports than professional sports. Look at the tailgating events. Look at how fervent the fan base is for college football compared to the NFL. I mean, look at our shows. We just on our show alone, we get such a higher turnout for college football compared to our NFL shows. And it's that because, like I said, it's because the heightened sense of loyalty, that emotional aspect, that emotional appeal that comes with college sports compared to professional sports. And the same comes for women's sports as well, specifically women's college basketball. There's that emotional aspect as well. There's that loyalty factor. But there's always been a stronger gravitational pull towards women's college basketball compared to the WNBA. And that's why you're able to get, women's college basketball on ABC primetime slots 3 times out the week, or compared to the WNBA where they might get one ABC primetime slot throughout the week. And one thing we talked about, or that I talk about the WNBA, is that the reason that they can't make money is because they can't get investments. Investors in TV companies, they don't want to invest in the WNBA because they're worried they might not get a return on investment. And when it comes down to it from strictly business perspective, you get paid what you're worth. You get paid what you're able to, based on the amount of money you're able to generate. That's not to say that you're not talented. That's not to say that you're not, quote unquote, deserving of the money. But if you can't generate more money, you're not going to get paid more. And that's just the business acumen of it. And so when it comes to the WNBA, if people don't want to watch the WNBA, then they're not going to make money. And it comes down to, that's what it comes down to. But when it comes to women's college basketball, we see that more people want to watch women's college basketball. So they're more willing to make investments into women's college basketball because they're starting to see that return on investment. Prime example of that is the matchup between Iowa and Virginia Tech. They played in a sold-out arena in Charlotte on a neutral site in November. 2 top 5 teams. Think about that. Virginia Tech and Iowa, both ranked in top 5. Neither of them are from North Carolina. Still managed to sell out that arena, and it wasn't on the primetime slot of ABC, but still was on the national spotlight with the game being played on ESPN2. And if I'm not mistaken, we looked at the Nielsen rating, that game, that TV slot, that time frame ended up generating around $4 million in streams just off that game alone. So TV companies see that, and they're more inclined to invest in women's college basketball and get them on those primetime slots. So as we start to see it grow and grow, yes, they're growing, and they're still not as big compared to the other sports in America, but the numbers are growing if we compare it to itself, and if we compare it to the WNBA. And it's a positive state for for women's college basketball. Is there still more room to grow? Yes, but at the end of the day, if people don't want to watch you play, then you're not going to generate money, and that's an unfortunate truth. And I'm saying that objectively as a student of the game, someone who loves basketball. I love watching women's college basketball. I love watching WNBA. I mean, I wouldn't be covering it if I didn't. But I understand how this business works. I understand how the media companies work. And you have to be able to generate money. And that's what storylines. And that's one thing that women's college basketball does well is storylines. Think about it. We haven't even discussed how South Carolina is the best team in women's college basketball, no question about it. The fact that they're ranked number 6 is an absurdity to me. They beat Notre Dame, a top 10 team, by 30 points. then they turn around and beat another top 10 team in Maryland by 40 points. There's no question about it. South Carolina is the best team in women's college basketball. And when the new rankings come out for this week, they should be ranked number 1. Number 2 at the lowest. And there's no question about South Carolina came to the season with a chip on their shoulder once they saw that they were ranked number 6. And just based on what I've seen so far, I don't see any team that can compete with South Carolina. I know it's very early, only a week and a half into the season, but based on what I've seen so far, I don't see any other team that can compete with South Carolina. Not LSU, not Iowa, not Virginia Tech. Like I said, not Notre Dame, not UConn, not NC State, not Florida State, not LSU, not Indiana. I don't see any team that can compete with South Carolina based on what I've seen so far. And just coming back to this game, listen, South Carolina goes 12 deep, and people say, well, yeah, they went 12 deep because they were up by 30. No, they went 12 deep in the first half when it was a 6-7 point game. This South Carolina team is loaded. It's absolutely loaded, and now they have shooters to surround the bigs with Cardoza and Watkins and Fagan. And we saw that Maryland tried to go zone on South Carolina, but South Carolina just shot him out. Listen, they shot 12-24 from the 3-point line. That's 50%. That's amazing. And that's not something they had last year. So they added that dimension, and it just makes them that much more of a threat and that much more formidable. But I wanted to use this segment to kind of to as a framing device for the topic of what it's going to take for women's college basketball to grow and to increase in revenue. And what's something we talked about before when it comes to media, when it comes to story, when it comes to getting more viewerships, headlines, narratives, stories build intrigue. Intrigue builds people turning in. Listen, at the end of the day, sports is all about narratives, all about storytelling, because it's entertainment. Sports is just entertainment at the end of the day. But let me know what you guys think about that in the chat room. I would love to hear all about it, guys. In our next segment, though, we are going to be discussing another top 5 matchup in women's college basketball between Iowa and Virginia Tech, and we're going to discuss what we saw about from there, and we're going to discuss whether either of these teams will legitimately have what it takes to be a Final Four team come April. So be sure to stick around for that, guys. You're not going to miss it. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. case you missed the first segment of our show, we just discussed the matchup between South Carolina and Maryland, and we use that as a framing device to discuss why women's college basketball generates more revenue, generates more turnout than the WNBA. And when it comes down to the storytelling, narratives, and what people are drawn to most. We gotta remember that sports is entertainment at the end of the day, and the more storylines you can generate, the easier it will be to create more turnout. And it's at this point in time, it's easier to create more storylines with women's college basketball than it is the WNBA, which is why you get more of that turnout. You get more people watching those games. And because that's the case, that's why women's college basketball is going to get more of the prime time slots. Not to mention there's more teams, so you get more opportunity for more games. But that's why women's college basketball always generate more money than WNBA. And when it comes down to it, quite frankly, people just want to watch women's college basketball. People aren't tuning into the WNBA. That doesn't mean there's no talent in the WNBA, but you know, it's a business, and if you're not generating revenue, not generating turnout, then you're not going to get those primetime slots. You heard me say I'm a proponent. I think this is the most talent there's ever been in women's basketball as a whole. I think that the game is in a beautiful space right now, but I understand the business side of it, that if you can't generate money and you can't get people tuned into the games, then you're not going to get those primetime slots. And that's all it comes down to. But you know, I want to talk about this matchup between Iowa and Virginia Tech. And as we talked about in the previous segment, listen, this was a neutral site game for both parties, and it was in a sold out arena in Charlotte. I believe that the Nielsen rating and the turnout for the game ended up being 4 million for a Thursday night game on ESPN2, which is phenomenal numbers, by the way. And it is a November game, so it's just phenomenal to see those numbers, like I said, for a November game. But looking at the actual basketball of it, what I saw from this game is that Iowa is still pretty much the same team as last year, with, you know, Caitlinclark obviously being the primary focal point of that offense. It looks as if the returners outside of Caitlinclark for Iowa have improved, though, especially from the shooting ability, particularly being Marshall, who did go over 6 last on that game. But Martin, who came off the bench last year but actually started this game for for Iowa, chipped in 10 points, 4 and 9 from the field. She has improved tremendously with her playmaking abilities. So having her in the backcourt with Clark will be tremendous, or a huge help for her. Stolke had 12 points and 4 rebounds. So it's like I'm saying, so it's pretty much the same team as last year for Iowa. Caitlinclark looks like she has improved. She took another step to the game. If we look at it, she didn't shoot particularly well from the 3-point line. She shot 5 of 16. It is volume shooting. She shot 13 of 31. So she didn't shoot particularly well from the field, but because she shoots in volume and she gets to the free throw line so efficiently, she shot 17 free throws. She was able to get in, put in 44 points. But if you look at it, that's over half. She's over half of the points for Iowa. So, and that's with Virginia Tech doubling off of ball screens and doubling outright towards the end of the game. You know, Clark was still able to get those numbers. So, you know, something we talk about in our coaching meetings when I was coaching is that at the high school and collegiate level, you can say, okay, we're gonna let you score 50, we're gonna let you score 44, whatever, but we're not gonna let the role players beat us, because we don't think you scoring 44 is going to be enough for you to beat us. So we'll let you go off for 44, 45, 47, whatever. But we're not going to let the role players beat us. And that was normally our thought process when we played teams that had guys that were averaging 27, 28 points per game. And that works in college and at the high school level. But once you start getting to the professional level, men's and women's, you can't do that anymore because players, guys and girls are so talented where that 40, that 35 will be enough to beat you just off of impact alone. So, this is the first time that I've seen where I've genuinely thought to myself, all right, I don't know if we should let Caitlin score 44, because just off her impact is starting to become that of a professional on the WNBA level, where you say, okay, yeah, we can't let her score 44 because the impact is just too great. But every other player I've seen, I've been confident saying, listen, we'll let you score 44 because that's not going to be enough to beat us. But now I'm starting to question that that sort of game plan, that sort of approach for Caitlin Clark in Iowa. But also we have to take into account that, listen, Virginia Tech shot 38% from the field. Caitlin only has 16 points, which is 4 points below her average. Georgia Amore did score 31 points. She shot 10 to 23 from the field. But maybe this is more just a revelation that Virginia Tech, there are there's levels within any sport. There's levels within women's college basketball, and yes, if you ask me, Virginia Tech is a top 5 team in the country. But are they on the level of South Carolina? No. Are they on the level of Iowa? No. Are they on the level of LSU? That's questionable. I would debate that. I would say yes, they are. But yeah, I think part of this is that Virginia Tech just had a bad shooting night as well. But they're going to need help. Something they struggle with is just their lack of athleticism, particularly on the defensive end. This was the issue they had last year. They're just not very athletic on the wings. They have a little bit of size on the low post, but Virginia Tech just doesn't have a lot of athleticism, so they don't get a chance to impose their will on the defensive end. They get out and run a lot, but once teams start to get physical with them, that's when they start to struggle. And that's something that Iowa did. They started to get physical with Virginia Tech, and Virginia Tech didn't do a good job of utilizing the height advantage they have, because, like I said, they have height advantage, but they're not necessarily that physical. And when they play more physical teams, they'll struggle. And that's something that Virginia Tech will need to improve on as the season progresses. But as of right now, they're not on the level of a South Carolina, of an Iowa. But I think they're right there with like the LSUs and the UConns. They're right there in that sort of area. But let me know what you guys think. Was this a great game by Iowa? More so bad game for Virginia Tech? What do you guys think about Caitlin Clark? Is she the best player in women's college basketball history? I won't go that far, but let me know what you guys think in the chat room. I'd love to hear all about it. In our next segment, guys, we are going to be discussing the state of affairs that is the Los Angeles Clippers and whether or not they made the right decision in trading for James Harden. So be sure to stick around for that, guys. You're not going to miss it. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. In case you missed the first couple segments of our show, we just discussed the state of affairs is women's college basketball and how the two recent top 10 matches between South Carolina and Maryland and Virginia Tech and Iowa, how both of those games really represent the space that women's college basketball is currently in, and how it's a positive, right, positive state, and how it has the potential to continue to improve, but also how it compares to where the WNBA is heading and where it's progressing to, and how the trajectories will always be much higher for women's college basketball than it will be for the WNBA. Whether that's right or wrong, it just is, and it's strictly from a business perspective. But in this segment, guys, I want to actually discuss whether there should be cause for concern for the Los Angeles Clippers, specifically after they made their trade for James Harden. Listen, something we talked about extensively on this show was whether or not James Harden would be a fit for the Clippers. And if you know, by listening to our show, we talked about how Ty Lue is such a great coach, one of the best coaches in the NBA. I have faith that he'll be able to make it work and find a way to make these pieces fit. However, I did state the caveat that Russell Westbrook would, either Westbrook or James Harden would need to come off the bench, and the offense would still need to be focused around Kawhi Leonard because he's your most dynamic player. However, it is surprising to me that Ty Lue has been really stubborn about not moving Harden or Westbrook to the bench. I was a proponent of moving Westbrook to the bench because I feel at this point in his career, Westbrook is able, more from a mental perspective, he's still able to be productive by coming off the bench. We saw that he was a Sixth Man of the Year candidate the first half of last season when he was with the Lakers and he was coming off the bench as a sixth man. Westbrook is also one of the vocal leaders for this Clippers organization. He garners a lot of respect in the locker room, and it's something that Westbrook will be willing and able to do because we've seen it before. It's unfortunate, but James Harden has the mentality, and as a point in his career, you have to, as a Clippers organization, you have to appease to him, and it's unfortunate. But you kind of have to. You have to make that work as much as you can because of what you've given up to receive James Harden. But something that we've noticed is that, listen, anytime you've established or you brought in great talent or a large bevy of talent, and at one point in time, it always takes a while for that talent, for those group of guys to gel and to really get into a rhythm, whether it be with LeBron and D Wade and Bosh in Miami, or LeBron and Kyrie and Kevin Love in Cleveland, or even Kevin Durant when he went to Golden State. There's a little bit of a time frame where they had to gel and get used to each other. And even when Kawhi and Paul George first got together with the Clippers back in 2019, there was a space and period of time during that first season where they had to gel and get accustomed to each other as well. So this is something that is not new, the concept of talented players having to gel and get used to each other, because, listen, basketball's rhythm is all about getting into a continuity with each other. So this is nothing new. So the fact that they're struggling is not surprising to me, but the extent to which they're struggling is a bit of a concern. But it's more of a concern because something that's glaring and obvious that everyone is pointing out is not being done yet by Ty Lue, which tells me that either Westbrook or Harden or both don't want to go to the bench, which is alarming because now that's a factor of ego. Whenever ego is involved, whenever too much ego is involved, now it starts to become detrimental to the betterment of the team. And whenever there's too much ego, a team can never be successful. And if ego is the reason this team's not going to win, it's going to be that much more detrimental, and it's going to be that much more disappointing. Because how many iterations of this team needs to be created in order to win a championship? At what point do you just say, all right, maybe we just need to start over, rebuild, if you're Steve Ballmer? But I'm a proponent. I think that with the Clippers, if they're able to manage this group of players. They're one of the best teams in the Western Conference. I think they're the second best team in the Western Conference behind Denver. I think they have a legitimate chance of making the finals, but you have, and I'm speaking now from a player's perspective, if you're James Harden, what you've been doing for the past 10 years has not worked. And that's the definition of insanity if you do the same thing over and over again but expecting different results. Eventually something is going to have to change. Eventually you're going to have to humble yourself. You're going to have to be willing to sacrifice for the team. It's something we look, if you're watching, if you've watched the Clippers actually play, it is incredible how stark of a contrast it is between the way they play when Harden's not on the court to compare it to when he is on the court. The offense literally stalls, just how it was when it was in Houston, and it stalls even worse than when he was in Philly. It's worse because all of the talent of or where the offense is generated in Los Angeles is on the perimeter, as opposed to Philly where it was Joel Embiid. There is offense that was generated within the low post, but there's no offense being generated when Harden's on the court because everything else just stalls. And I don't want to get too much into it, but it could be just a matter of him trying to get used to the system. But he needs to approach it as, I need to buy into this system. I need to learn this system, as opposed to these guys need to get adjusted to me. And that's why at first when I saw this trade and we were reviewing this trade, I said that the Clippers' culture and locker room presence is so strong and already established that the guys would tell James, whether through action or verbally, that, hey, you need to buy into us. We're not buying into you. You were brought here, so you need to buy into our system, and you need to fit what we're doing here. But it looks like, from what I've seen these first 6 games, that they're trying to acquiesce to James Harden. And I get it, when you have high level talented guys, you want to be a bit more accommodating, but they're being too accommodating for James Harden, and now starting to affect the dynamic of the team. Listen, they're 0-6, and the offense just looks stagnant. And not only that, but defensively now you're more reliability, because James Harden isn't known for his defensive prowess. He isn't necessarily a great on-ball defender. And so now you start. You not only do you start small, but your guards, neither of them are great defenders with Westbrook and Harden. So I am 100% sure that Westbrook or Harden will be going to the bench to be the 6th man, because that's the only way the Clippers can be successful. I just don't, based on what I've seen so far, I just don't see how they can be successful starting Harden, Westbrook, Paul George, and Kawhi Leonard. It's not plausible. And realistically, I would have James Harden come off the bench based on what worked for the Clippers. But knowing how egos come into play and what we've seen before, Westbrook is going to be the one to come off the bench, which isn't necessarily a bad thing for the Clippers. It might actually be a positive. But is there cause for concern? I don't want to say that just yet. Let's give it another week. Then we can start to say if there's cause for concern. But I'm not surprised that there's struggles. They have been struggling, because that's typical when talented. When you get a new group of guys, or you bring in a talented guy that has to join a system. So I'm not surprised that they're struggling. But I am a little bit surprised to the extent of which they're struggling. But in the Western Conference, you can't afford to go 0-6, man. You can go from a 2 seed to an 8 seed just that quick. So they do need to turn it around right now. So I won't say there's cause for concern yet. Let's give it another week. Let's reevaluate this in a week and see where they're at. But let me know what you guys think in the chat room. Let me know what you guys think about that. And in our next segment, guys, we are going to be discussing who has been the best player in the NBA so far. I think our answer might surprise you. So be sure to stick around for that, guys. You're not going to miss it. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. In case you missed the first couple segments of our show, we just discussed how these two recent top 10 matchups in women's college basketball are a positive representation for where women's college basketball is heading and the trajectory that it's going in. We also discussed the state of affairs that is the Los Angeles Clippers and whether there should be cause for concern within that organization. But in this last segment, guys, we're not going to spend too much time with it, but I want to pose the question, really, who is the best player in the NBA so far? Or who has been the best player in the NBA so far this season? And I think our answer might surprise you. So, has Anthony Edwards been the best player in the NBA? Listen, you guys know how I feel about Anthony Edwards. If you've been watching our show for the past couple of years, I talked about how Anthony Edwards is the closest thing to Dwayne Wade that I've seen since Dwayne Wade retired, and how his explosiveness is not real, and how he will be the face. He is the face of Minnesota. I was saying this last year, but I got a lot of pushback because a lot of people were saying Cat was, but no, I've seen enough. I know Anthony Edwards is the face of Minnesota, and Anthony Edwards has the potential to be a top 5 player, possibly an MVP candidate in the NBA as he continues to progress and to increase his skill set. And listen, on the season so far, he's averaged 20 points a game, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, shooting just about 50% from the field. And Minnesota's 7-2 on the season, top 3 team in the Western Conference. You can make the argument now that Anthony Edwards is an MVP candidate, and he's the most improved player candidate. And there's no doubt he's an all-star, and he should have been. He was an all-star last year by alternate, and he's, no question about it, a top 10 player in the league right now. At this point in the season, top 10 player in the league right now. He's shown what makes his improvement that much more drastic is that his ability to improve, make other players around him improve. His playmaking has increased. Like I say, he's averaging 5.4 assists, which is actually tied for 3rd in the league. And that was the next step in his progression, his playmaking ability and his ability to make other guys better around him. And so now Minnesota is better because of that. Their offense is much more dynamic, more free-flowing now. And Anthony Edwards' ability to shoot off the ball and move off the ball has continued to improve as well, which makes him that much more difficult to guard. And now people are starting to see why Minnesota was willing to spend the number 3 draft pick on him. And listen, we saw this coming back during the summer during the FIBA World Championships. Anthony Edwards took complete control over that team by becoming the leader, and that is just starting to segue into the NBA, into the season. And there's no doubt about it, Anthony Edwards is a top 10 player in the league at this point in the season. Extremely early in the year, but he would get my MVP vote. Is obviously extremely early, but I think he has been the best player in the NBA so far at this point in the season. Just off of this season, I feel like he's been the best player in the NBA so far. And he has the stats to prove it. Like I said, he's averaging 28, 6, and 5. And his Minnesota's 7-2 in the Western Conference. So I beg someone to show me a player that has had a larger impact on this team than Anthony Edwards. So I just want to pose that question. I want to talk about that with you guys. But let me know what you guys think in the chat room. Is Anthony Edwards the best player in the NBA? Has he been the best player in the NBA so far this season? Let me know what you guys think in the chat room. I'll be looking forward to hearing all about it. But with that being said, guys, that's it for our show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a wonderful show. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button as well, so you guys can stay up to date on all of our latest content. Be sure to follow us on Patreon as well. You can do so by going to patreon.com, clicking on the search bar, typing in Sorry to Bother You Show. That way you can gain access to all of our exclusive content that we post daily. And if you'd like to support our network and our company, you can do so by following the link in the ticker below. It's streamelements.com/SorryToBotherYouShow/tip. Once again, it's streamelements.com/SorryToBotherYouShow/tip. None of this is possible as you guys are fans. We're so grateful and honored for all the love and support that you show us, because it's a pleasure and a blessing to have this platform. All the links for for our donations and for our Patreon and for and for our official website where you can get merch is going to be in the description of this video. But with that being said, guys, we'll be back again same time tomorrow, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, with our college football show. We'll be reviewing the newest rankings from the College Football Playoff Committee. So until then, guys, continue to stay safe, be vigilant, make smart decisions, and peace.